This is Richard Wolff with today's economic update. I want to talk about the shift from a free trade policy to a protectionist policy. That's what Mr. Trump and the Republican Party have done, excuse me, and it's worth a comment. What does free trade mean? It means that the United States government has a policy of reducing or eliminating tariffs, reducing and eliminating quotas, reducing and eliminating all kinds of governmental interference in the free trade of goods and services and capital for investment and people moving from one country to another, to remove governmental rules and regulations to allow for quote-unquote free international trade. What is protectionism? Well, it's kind of the opposite. It's when the government steps in a massive way to control the trade processes, to control the movements of goods and services, to control the movements of capital and people. Protection is old, as is free trade. Capitalism as a system has gone back and forth between them multiple times over the last 200 or 300 years. We've had a free trade approach for most of the period since the end of the Second World War, in large part because protectionism was seen as a major contributor to both World Wars I and II. But Mr. Trump has changed all that, and the Republican Party with him. They have moved away from free trade and embraced protectionism. First step was to control the movement of people, barring immigrants in that case. The second step was to control the movement of investment, making it difficult for the Chinese, for example, to invest in the United States. The third step, and the biggest one, was to control the movement of goods and services by imposing tariffs on Mexico and Canada to begin with, on China, on Europe, pretty much on everybody the United States trades with, more or less, sooner or later. And I want to comment on what it's all about. And this comment is on two stages or two levels. One, why Mr. Trump and the Republicans did it, and number two, what it means for the rest of us. Easy to explain why they did it. It's politically advantageous to them. Number one, it allows Mr. Trump and the Republicans to portray themselves to an American working class that has suffered, particularly over the last decade since the capitalist crash of 2008. He's protecting us, and we need protection. Other politicians talk about it but don't do anything. He looks like he's actually going to do something. And he starts right off by protecting us from poor immigrants from Central America. Yes, it's a stretch, but for people who haven't been protected in any way, it's something, isn't it? The second thing he does is impose tariffs. Tariffs is the name for a tax. Mr. Trump is a taxing president. Not quite the role the Republicans used to advocate, but he's doing it, and it makes him look like he's Mr. Tough Guy, hard negotiating with others, just like on TV on the programs where he was Mr. Tough Guy too. Gary Cohn, his chief economic advisor in the early part of his term, testified today, I believe over the weekend, that the tariffs imposed on China did little to affect the relationship between the United States and China and hurt the United States economically. I don't doubt that for a minute. I think that's why Mr. Trump had to sign an agreement with the Chinese. Mr. Cohn is right. He doesn't have to run for re-election the way Mr. Trump does, so he can call it pretty much like everybody else sees it, except for Mr. Trump and, unfortunately, the compliant Democratic Party and media accessories to Mr. Trump's political theater. But I don't want to leave it at the level of how Mr. Trump is feathering his own political nest by these games. He's also getting big donations from companies who are helped by the tariffs, who want to keep him in, and by companies who are hurt by the tariffs but want to show him their friendship so they get an exemption, as many companies have. But I don't want to leave it there either. What's the bigger question? Is protection better? Is free trade better? And the answer is, we don't know. And the bigger answer is, it doesn't matter. Here's why. Capitalists are fighting out this battle. It's their battle. There are companies helped by tariffs, and there are companies hurt by them. And they are working overtime with their money and their lobbyists and the votes they can help buy to get their way. The outcome will be what the outcome will be. It's got nothing to do with the general public. We're going to be continuing our position as employees, with companies trying to gut our benefits, reduce our security, limit our wages, just as before. And how big a difference will it make that they're being protected or not, they're doing free trade or not? Their fight, their struggle, it doesn't affect most Americans in any clear way, especially over the longer run. So don't get fooled. The only reason you're hearing arguments about why you should be for Mr. Trump's protectionism or against it is because the capitalists fighting it out would like us to be on their side. It gives them a little bit more when they pressure the politicians. But that's all. Capitalism is our problem. The employer-employee struggle, that's our problem. The failure to give working people a real power in the workplace, that's our problem. Protectionism versus free trade never was and is not now our problem. It's theirs.